We talked about roots in the remainder theorem, but let's talk about them in a little bit more general sense and what that actually means on our graph. They're where our line or our function crosses the x-axis. Well, not always can you factor it like we did with the remainder theorem. It doesn't always work that way. So we're going to be looking at how to graph these polynomials or these functions if they have a degree higher than 2. Okay, so if we're talking about a cubic or a quintic, we're going to be talking about that kind of stuff. We're actually going to do this a little bit backwards than the book. The book has you talking about approximating the zeros first, then graphing. I think it's a little bit easier to do the graphing first and then vice versa. So with that being said, we first need to talk about what a relative min and what a relative max are. And this is best described with our cubic or any type of odd function. It's just a little bit easier. If I have an odd function, so this is a degree of 3 because we've got 2 curves and it goes in the opposite direction. What this means, my relative max. This means this is the best value that I can find for a maximum. Yes, my arrow goes up in the up direction in the right, as you guys can see, and my maximum it's going to keep going on forever. But my relative max is talking about my curves. So this right here is a relative max. It is relative to the area that it is around. Over here is my relative min. And we know then this is a root, this is one a root, and this one is a root. Okay? Now you can have more than one relative min or more than one relative max. An example of that would be a function to the 4th. So I have, in this picture, I have 2 relative mins and 1 relative max. Okay, so let's first look at how to graph this. So let's say, for instance, I have a function f of x, which is x cubed minus 2x squared plus 6. We've kind of done this a little bit before. The easiest way actually is to graph it using your graphing calculator, but we'll be talking about that in class. The next best method is using a t-chart or an h-chart, whichever one you prefer. And you're going to pick some values. Generally, I don't want to go too large, but I don't want to go too small that I don't see the whole picture. So I'm just going to pick some values. And I'm going to plug them in. So I'm going to take that negative 10 and plug it into the x spot and see what I get. When I plug it in, I get negative 1,194. For negative 5, I get negative 169. Negative 1 is 3. 0 is 6. 1, 5. 581. 10, 806. So notice I'm getting larger, I am peaking based on our numbers at the 6, and then I drop down, and then I go back up. So we can say that somewhere between here, well, not somewhere between here, between 3 and 81, I've got a relative min and max somewhere between there. I also know between -5 and 1 that my graph is going to cross the x-axis. Okay, so I know something's going on between -5 and 5. To get a better idea of what is actually going to go on, I'm going to zoom in on those numbers. Now that I know that I'm going to zoom in between -5 and 5, I have an idea that the numbers are going to increase from -5 to -1, yes. So I'm not going to necessarily go with -5. I might start at -3. Same thing with between 1 and 5. I see that it's increasing, so I'm going to just go to 3 as well. So now I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to make another, make another H chart just so I can get a better idea of what's actually going on. I'm not going to put in the -1 or the 0 or the 1 just because I've already got those numbers there. So I'm adding in a couple more values. So when I plug those in, I get -39, -10. For 2, I get 6. 3, I get 15. So looking at this, I now have points that I can plot to get a better idea. So if I'm looking at this, so I go from -3 to -2, I'm getting bigger. -1 peaks at 3, 0 is at 6. So I'm gonna have a relative max there. And then at 1, I go down to 5, but then I'm coming back up. So 1, 5 must be somewhere around my relative min. And then I'm going back up. Okay, so based on these numbers, I have an idea of what to plot. So let's talk about our plot here. I'm going to go by 2's on my y-axis and 1's with my x-axis. Because I can see that, okay, -10 to -5 to -3, those are big values. I know I'm increasing, so I already kind of have an idea. So these are the points that I am going to plot. All right, so like we said, -2, -10, -1, 3. Okay, so we're still going up. 0, 6. Okay, still going up there. 1, 5. Okay, I dropped. Okay, so I know somewhere that's going to be kind of my relative max. And then I go to 2, 6. Okay, I'm going back up. 3, 15, which is clear up here somewhere. Okay, so I kind of have a rough sketch of my graph. It's a rough sketch. Is it perfect? No, but we're going to talk about that later on and how to use your graphing calculator. Okay, so based on this, based on my graph, I'm then going to be asked to approximate the 0. Okay, so looking at this, this is my root or my 0. I'm supposed to give an approximation. Well, I'd say roughly -1.5, somewhere around there. Okay. When you're doing this and you're actually graphing on your own, I would suggest using graphing paper just to keep everything so it's perfect. Your points are plotted perfectly versus my rough sketch. Okay. So with that being said, I'm going to ask you to I'm not going to actually ask you to graph another one of these just because of time, but I'm going to give you some pictures like this one here and ask you some questions based on that, okay? So looking at this, I've got two pictures here. I'm just going to be asking you some questions based on these pictures, and they'll be right after each other. So my first picture here, you should be able to figure out what type of degree it is, as well as how many zeros, and approximate your relative min and max. Same thing with picture 2. Good luck. So to start with picture 1, I have a 0. I have a 0 here at approximately -4, 0. I have a 0 at -1, 0. I have another one at a +1, 0. And then my last one is approximately at 3, 0. I have a relative minimum about here. I have a relative max here and a relative min here. Looking at my second picture, I have a root at approximately -2, 0. I have another one. I'm going to say that's about 1/3, -1/3, 0. And then the last one is not quite 2, but pretty close to it. So I'm going to give it a rough estimate here of 1.75, 0. Those are my roots. I have a relative max and one relative min.